and welcome to episode 175. Here we are live on Facebook, if you happen to be watching live, that is, unless you happen to be watching any of the recorded episodes, in which case there's 174 other episodes to take a look at. Go and subscribe somewhere below. Also, if you find this enjoyable, do hit the like as well. So today is a feedback session. We're going to be looking at 4 different people have sent in images for feedback. But if you do happen to be watching live just now, then leave a comment, say hello, tell me what the weather's like where you are, and we'll make a start. So yes, hello. I can see we've got a couple of people in already. So Jack says, hello everyone. Pat says, it's murky here in Minehead. Susan says, murky, misty in Kakubri too, and it's cold. Oh, Jack says it's actually raining there in Florida. Maggie also says it's cold and grey, and it is actually here in Castle Douglas. I went out for a walk earlier, and it was definitely didn't seem to matter how many layers I had on. It was just sort of creeping into the bones. John says hello from Ohio. April says hello everyone from a sunny and cold morning in Long Island, New York. Meg says hello everyone. Stacey says a chilly morning. Sunday after a busy working weekend full of shoppers at Coles this Black Friday. So hello from Hatboro. That's Pennsylvania. Nadia says hello everyone. And Robert joins us saying howdy all from a sunny and cold Texas. Right, okay, well, welcome everyone. So yes, today, as I said, there's we've had 4 different people send in images, so we're going to be looking at that. And yes, I'll sort of basically, I suppose we just work our way through that. We have a couple of 2 or 3 of them I think are really more kind of about cropping and trying, as always, trying to find the story. But we do also have one where there's I'm going to be going kind of drilling quite a bit deeper down into Murray's photo, but we'll talk about that one later on. So yeah, keep the comments coming, and yeah, any questions that are going as well. Right, okay, I feel like I've forgotten something. I'm not entirely sure what, but let's make a start. So let me dig out the photos here, and what we'll do is we'll start with I think we'll start with Jack actually now, because I know Jack's in. So Jack was, let me just see here. So Jack was saying he put in a picture of a fish lying on the grass. He said this fish was dropped by a fish hawk. Very cool. The problem I have is not being so lucky with the light. Is the fish just being too bright? I think the focus is good. The fish changes so much in everything I've tried and not for the best. So okay, so let me pull up this picture and show you what we're talking about. So here we have this fish, and this fish so dropped by a fish hawk, which is really cool if you happen to be standing there and suddenly this fish hawk swoops past and a fish drops out of its claws and lands in front of you or near enough by for you to whip out your camera and take a photo of the fish. Shame you couldn't get the fish dropping, but that's that moment by the time you realise what's going on and you've got your camera ready. It's all long past. We've all been there. So you find a fish lying on the grass and go, oh, right, okay, that's cool. What can we do with it? And so this is the photo you took. This is the unedited version. So I think, given the fact that you couldn't actually get the fish falling in action, so we've now got a fish in the grass, which is an unusual place to find a fish. So what can we do with it? Now, the fish does, part of the appeal of a story like this is the fact that the fish is in these unnatural surroundings, but at the same time, it makes it slightly awkward to know how to expose for it. And so what you're saying is that pretty much every time, what you're aware of here with the exposure is that the grass all feels quite dark around it. So when you try and brighten up the whole picture, then what happens inevitably is that the fish ends up being too bright. So what do we do here? And I think okay, let's just drag this into Photoshop and take a quick look to see, because I think the first thing to think of is the crop. This is where your sort of starting point is. What's the story? What's the interesting part of this photo? And how do you kind of emphasize, intensify that? And really what's going on is it's here. It's in with the head of the fish. If we kind of zoom in a bit, that's where you've got your focal point. As it sort of drifts over here, it starts to get out of focus a little bit. So really, I think with the crop, what we're looking at is you want to kind of come in closer to the fish head. If you'd had the full length of the fish body, then maybe we would have tried something out and created the shape of the fish within the grass. Given the fact that you don't have the tail at the end there, the real bit is the fish head. Now, the fish head coming in just at a kind of horizontal angle doesn't really give us much. So this is the point whereby really what you want to do is you want to have it at an angle. Now, you could have it at an angle pointing down the way. I think probably if you had it at an angle kind of pointing up the way. So let's create a diagonal. So it's sort of pointing sort of towards the top end upper corner, something like that, I think, and then get the eye around that point of the kind of rule of thirds ideal. Then if we just have that body kind of creeping into the again, that bottom corner, it gives you this kind of really nice diagonal kind of curving across the screen. And I think crop-wise, that immediately makes it sort of a little bit more, it's giving us a sort of, this is what it's about. So now we can see fish head, we can see grass, we can go, what's the fish doing in the grass? So we've got that bit going on. This little bit of twig here is sort of slightly, I would say, kind of grabbing attention. So I'll just use the content aware tool to just remove that. And now what do we do? So I'll just make a copy of that and let's just take it into Camera Raw Filter. I can't remember whether Jack, whether it's you who uses Affinity or whether that was Roy. But basically, first of all, depending on your which editing software you're using, if I go to Auto, that kind of brightens things up a bit, but maybe it's kind of brightened the grass a bit too much as well. So what I might do is I want to kind of maybe up the exposure a little bit, bring the shadows up a touch, but maybe that bring the exposure up a little bit more, but we can see we're starting to brighten out on the fish. So take the highlights down, so we've still got the texture in the fish. And I think that's, I think that bit's really quite important. But what I think I might do this in two steps. What I'll also do is let's give it a little bit of a vignette as well. Not too much, but just enough to kind of take the edges off so that we are getting drawn more into what's going on. So I'm going to click OK with that. So we've gone from that to that. But then what I want to do is I want to kind of add a bit more texture into the fish as well, and a bit more contrast, but I don't want to do it right across the board. So if I duplicate that layer and we go to Filter, go back into Camera Raw Filter, only now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the effects and I'm going to hit the clarity and maybe a little bit of texture, something like that. So that's really bringing out the bits in the fish here. The problem is it's kind of overcooking everything else as well. So what I will do is I will mask it. So in this case, click an out and the little mask, layer mask. That takes us, so we're seeing through the layer below. And now if I make sure that the paintbrush is white here on the right, I can then just selectively paint in that extra level of texture onto the fish. Now I could maybe do it down the whole body, or maybe I just kind of take it down to where it's starting to blur out, and that's about as far as we need to go. So another thing I could do here, just to make sure that it's not too dark, well, levels are kind of okay. Could maybe nudge those up a little bit, not much, but we do want to be kind of careful about the grass. What we could even do is take the curves and what we're doing here is thinking about just darkening the grass down a little bit. So again, now we've darkened the whole lot. What I want to do is lighten up the fish. So I'll put that through to black to allow and just kind of paint that in a bit. Perhaps take a little kind of slightly softer brush just to kind of take the edges out a little, paint them in so there's not like a hard line. And here we then end up with, I think, if I just kind of group everything together like that, then we can see the difference between the original and the edited version. Or, after we've kind of cropped it up, or in fact, actually, if we go right back to the very original version, then we're looking at from that through to this. And I think at this point, this is about as far as you can go, I think, with the fish. So we have the fish, we have, unless you wanted to get in with a macro lens, where you really want to go in and get these little bits of teeth and stuff like that. Here you have fish and grass. And then if you've got your little story to go with it or something like that, then I think that's... So ultimately then, Jack, what we're talking about is the idea of using your crop to work out first of all, identifying what's the important bit of this photo, and the important bit really, given the fact that you don't have the whole body, is to zero in on the head, because that's the bit that we're interested in. And then it's the contrast between the head and the grass around it. So you want to make sure that the fish head is standing out a bit more. So we've made sure that we've upped the kind of contrast and detail texture in the head, allow the background to kind of soften out a bit and darken it down a bit, so that it stands out. There's enough of the background to know that it's a grassy background, but without it interfering with the fish head. So I hope that all makes sense. But thank you for sending that one in. Right, okay. So a couple more comments here. Yes, Stacey's wishing happy Thanksgiving to April and Jack. Of course, it was Thanksgiving the other day, so happy Thanksgiving to all our friends across the pond there. Okay, bits of chat going back on. Pat says the angle makes it look more like an eel. April agrees. Jack says thank you so much. Susan says great edit, Kim. Rotating the image really helps. Yeah, I think the point about the image rotation, just to reiterate, is the idea of bringing in that notion of a diagonal. And a diagonal, we've talked about many times before, and we'll no doubt talk about many times again, is the diagonal helps to add a level of energy and dynamism to something. And even if it is a dead fish, there's still, it sort of creates a line moving through the picture, which I think kind of, yeah, just adds that little bit extra. Oh, Peter's joined us as well from a cold and dull Annan. So welcome, Peter. Right, okay. So next one I want to move on to then is Nicola. So well, let's find Nicola's photo. So Nicola sent in this, and there's another version. This one, in fact, actually, I think this was the original, and then she kind of cropped in and did this. So what Nicola said was, "Hi Kim, I took this in our garden a couple of weeks ago and I liked the way it looked. The leaves were almost hanging on, plus the way the light was filtering through. Yeah, nice bit of backlight coming in there, really warm, nice and atmospheric." And she says, one thing I find myself questioning on a lot of photos is the crop. This one in particular, I've slightly changed the crop on this to a wider one. I'd also be grateful for any advice on this and anything else you may be able to help with this shot, please. Although generally I now do shoot in JPEG and RAW, I think I've deleted the original, including the RAW, when it came off the camera. This has had a quick run through the camera RAW to warm up the tones. Revised crop is below, and original, sorry, yeah, this is the revised crop and the original was below in the comments. So so that's the original. Look forward to hearing your thoughts. Okay, so basically then, this is the original. She's cropped in to create this. And what we're really talking about then is, again, what do you do with something like this? It's fun, it's nice. I mean, I can zoom in here, and it's a rather beautiful. We've got beautiful leaves here. We've got a nice soft background here, but overall, she's kind of struggling, I think, to make these bits here, where it's focused, properly, fully stand out against the background. So again, let's just open this in Photoshop. And I think I'll just close Jack's fish there. And I think here, really, again, there's a certain thing to do with the crop. This bit here is where the story is. All the rest of it is support. When I zoomed in like that, actually, this starts to look a bit more interesting, I think. That here, we're now making out the detail in the leaves, and the background really is feeling in the background. Whereas, when we are out here, there's more leaves going on up here, and it's kind of busier all round. So, I mean, I think there's a couple of different crops you could make. In a way, I mean, that's quite an interesting crop. You know, where you come in and you zoom in on these leaves, and then you have a little bit of lightness coming through. This one here, where you've got little bits of shadow, and you have hints of other bit. I think your key, we've got this one here even, where cropped in like that, and you've got a kind of line swinging off to the left. I kind of think, though, that it's sort of around this bit is really what you're thinking about. So if we kind of pull this down to here and pull this up to here, you end up with something a little bit more like this, I think. And now when you've got this crop, I think this is kind of starting to make it stand out a little bit more against the background. We're getting more of the story. We're sort of, I've forgotten the word, the opposite of diluting, kind of intensifying. There's another word, distilling, that's the word I was looking for. We're sort of distilling the essence of what it is you're trying to go for. Another thing here to have a little think about is you talk about the warm tones, and they are beautifully warm tones. If you want to make the subject, which is the front leaves, stand out against the background, is sometimes you can do that with color shift as well. So if I duplicate that layer, if I go to image adjust tone, well, that's maybe a bit too much. Image adjust contrast, image adjust color. Okay, that's maybe, let me go back to here. Image adjust color. Yeah, maybe. And then, yeah, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to take this, I'm going to take a little, rather than using the auto. So it's always worth hitting the auto to see what happens. If the auto doesn't give it, I'm just going to go into Photoshop here. And I'm going to take, because this is very much over in the yellows, I'm going to take this and I'm going to move it into the blues. Just a little bit cooler like that. Now, we don't want all of it boss like that. We want to now bring back out. So again, just like we did with fish, we're going to create a mask, and I'm going to just bring back in the warm tones on these front leaves like this. That's currently sitting at 48%, so I need to, that actually allows me to just guide it slightly. It doesn't matter if I overrun a little bit and a little bit of the background comes in, but what we're mostly looking at is kind of avoiding background and just allowing those warm tones to really kind of come back in onto those front leaves. And now what happens is we've gone, it helps, do you see that these front tones, these front leaves now stand out a little bit more, because as well as the background being out of focus, we've got a slightly different color hue, different color shift to it as well. So that's really where I would go with this, Nicola, is like we said with Jack, what you've got to kind of do is identify where the key part of the story is, which in this case is the leaves at the front, and the background is supporting that. All that lovely bouquet of outer focus leaves in the background is giving you this beautiful context to make sure that the key subject is standing out against it. And if you're needing to make sure that it stands out against it, you can do things like lighten and darken. You can do things like focus, which is what you've already done, but you can also do these color shifts so that if the thing you're wanting to focus on is warmer tones, make the background cooler tones, or vice versa. So I hope that makes sense to you, Nicola, but thanks for sending those photos in. And I know you're not able to watch today, but if you are watching on catch up, just to say, you've been putting up some beautiful photos on Facebook lately with the cold frost. Saw some lovely photos yesterday, so yeah, keep up with it. Right, okay, so thank you for that. Right, let's see what else we've got. Okay. Oh, April says she loves the backlight, and also the likes the crop and the close up. Yeah, when we get the close up, is really into that. And Pat says the leaves look pretty now, and says I'm missing Meg. Oh, Meg is watching. She did say hello earlier, so I'm sure Meg can probably scribble down hi, Pat. Oh yeah, you see, Meg's just commented now saying I really like the bright yellow colour in the leaves as well. Okay, cool. Right, so let's move on then. But actually, just a quick break to say that if you are enjoying finding these podcasts useful, interesting, or entertaining, and you would like to support them, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is one of the ways you can do it. Also, of course, invite your friends along, and likewise, make sure you subscribe, make sure you click like, and yeah, drag anybody else along or point these podcasts in that direction. Right, okay, so let's move on. Oh yeah, Meg's now said hi, Pat. There you go. So now what we're going to do, I'll go to Viji. Where was Viji's? Let's click here, and Viji says, So of course it was Diwali last weekend, and I think Viji was busy taking photos, and she said, "Hi Kim, I took this photo of a firework on our terrace with a slow shutter speed. It's called a flower pot. This was taken without a tripod. The smoke I could not avoid. There are several stripes and the shapes on the ground look interesting. Let me know a couple of crops that actually could be more attractive, and is there a way to hide the smoke?" So we've got a little thing called a flower pot firework that's put on the ground, little bits shoot up, and doing the slower shutter speed means that we get these fantastic lines shooting up. And I really love these little almost like creatures or flowers kind of on the wall, just at the bottom, as they kind of spray out like that. So this is one which it's a difficult one to kind of, it's one of these where you kind of need to take several photos and gauge as you're going. So you take the first one, and if it feels overexposed, then you need to, you see, I mean, there's such beautiful patterns here, like here and here. I'm sure there would be more in here, but the problem is there's so many going off, they're much brighter, so we're losing some of the detail in here. But then we also have some lovely kind of strips coming up here. You go to something like that, it's really starting to look quite abstract. We don't necessarily know what it is, but we've got all these interesting stripes going on. So when it comes to crop, there's kind of different things you can do. So again, if we just open that with Photoshop, we just close Nicola's one there. Lots of options here. I think, like I say, we can. There's places where you could decide if you wanted, if you were zooming in, to sort of make more of these little kind of creatures or flowers. If there this is blown out just a bit too much to be able to get detail back from. Although if you've got the raw file, you might have a couple more options to rescue some bits. But there's beautiful shapes in there. And then if you again maybe chip the bottom or something like that, maybe crop out that little bit of light in the background. But if you just have enough of that with these lights then shooting up as well, I think that creates an interesting shape. So in a way, kind of what you need to do is almost kind of create yourself a little square or a little box and move it around the picture and see where you can find bits of story within it. As for the smoke, inevitably you're going to get a little bit of smoke, and the question is the smoke distracting from it or enhancing the story? Now you're slightly concerned about it. Let me just duplicate this layer. Actually, I'll tell you what, let's just go back to the open one so we can, if we're just talking about the smoke, what are your options for the smoke? Now, in a way, there's not huge amounts, but if we go into Camera Raw, sometimes if you've got mist or smoke, what you can do is you can play, there's a dehaze option, I think in effects, yes, in effects, dehaze, and it kind of is a bit like contrast. What it does is it darkens the darks and brightens the lights. But you can see if I drag this over here, this smoke on the left kind of disappears. Likewise, if I push it the other way, where what we're doing is kind of getting less contrast, that smoke becomes enhanced. So sometimes the dehaze tool can do bits and pieces. What it is, and then maybe if we go back up to the light, we take down the highlights, again, something like this. You can see actually we are getting more detail going on down here. Now this is a low resolution image because this is just one you sent me on Facebook. But if you happen to have a high resolution raw file, depending on what you took this, whether you took it with your phone or you took it with your mirrorless camera, if you took it with your mirrorless camera, then you will find there's an awful lot more detail you can probably pull out of this. And by lowering down those highlights, you can see that, and again, boosting the contrast a little bit or something like that, then it's darkening down other parts here. We're getting a bit more detail at the highlights, and the smoke is just fading back. It's not disappearing completely, but it's not as prominent as it was. And then once we've got something like that, perhaps then use something like the remove tool to get rid of the bright parts in the back that are kind of grabbing a little bit too much attention. And at this point, then maybe you kind of can crop in, find little interesting bits of story or whatever, something like this maybe. Now, like I say, in this one, because it's low resolution, we're getting these kind of extra bits of colour coming in, which probably wouldn't be there. But I think hopefully there's enough there for you to kind of go back to your original and play around with it. So hope that makes sense to you, Viji. But thank you for sending that in. And yeah, I actually, if you were doing a handheld slow shutter speed, you did extraordinarily well as well. If you don't have a tripod, there's always the idea of resting it on something, whether it's a small coffee table or that notion of beanbag that we've talked about, that you can maybe put over something to kind of keep either your camera or your phone steady. Right, okay. Okay, what else we got? Oh, Maggie says, love the light lines in this. And Peter says, nice image. And, Meg and Pat are chatting to each other. Right, okay. So, thank you, Viji, for sending that one in. So what we're going to do now, then, is the last one I'm going to do came from Murray Snaps. Now, I don't think his first name is Murray and his last name is Snaps. I think that's Snaps is more of the verb. That's what he does. It's part of his photo. But I didn't quite catch what Murray's first name was. But he put into he put it into the Facebook group, and that's worth reminding as well, if you happen to be watching this. If you would like to take part in any of these images, take part in the feedback, and you would like to, or any of the challenges that I do, we have a Facebook group also called Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. You can place your images in that. If you don't do Facebook, then you can email me, kim@kimayres.co.uk. Send me your image. If you're looking for feedback, let me know what it is you're looking for, where your difficulty is, what your struggling point is, and I will do my best to help. Right, yes, so Murray sent in, let's show this one. Now, he's already done quite a bit of editing to it, and it's quite a fun, interesting photo. And he says, hi Kim, first I'd like to thank you for all the tips you've given me/us on your YouTube channel. I often don't have time to watch it on a Sunday, but I always watch it on a Monday. I'm a hobbyist with an interest in portraits and like to see how other people edit a portrait, like eyes, skin, light, etc. I've added a portrait of my grandson playing poker, but I feel it needs something added to give it a movie look. Maybe more shadow or a colour grade? Can you help? Okay, so this is interesting. This is a kind of a little bit more, a kind of different kind of approach for me. So the other photos we've looked at so far have either been unedited or edited lightly, and it's a case of where do we go from the starting point. For this one, Murray has already done quite a lot of work to it, and it has become quite stylized as well. There's a way he's treated the skin which has given it a kind of soft glow and a very kind of smooth feel to it. And that, in a way, makes it look more like an illustration, I would say, rather than cinematic. So this is kind of where it becomes a little bit interesting in how you decide you want to process your image. You can take an image like this. So he's got the setup, he's got his grandson, got a hat on, got cards in the front, glass of whiskey, radio, cigar. We've got all the ingredients there. But what are you going to do with a photo like this? And how you then decide to process it, the editing of it, can make it look more theatrical, can make it look more cinematic, can make it look more painterly, or can make it look more like a kind of an illustration as well. And I kind of think this has a kind of painterly illustration kind of feel to it. But if you're wanting to make it cinematic, I think you kind of start from a slightly different angle. So what are we going to talk about? So I asked... Now, yes, so I asked him to send me the original raw file, if he had it, and here we go. Here you can see the raw file. So we've got most of the elements. You can see that the way he's cropped it much more, cropped out more of the front, these cards at the front, probably to give it more of a cinematic crop, added in a little bit more of the green tablecloth, or cropped it, and, you know, and then he's had to lighten up the shirt, and smoothed out the skin. Because if we come in here, what we notice is the skin is much more textured, like the way skin tends to be. Little bits of dry skin, and what have you, which what Murray has done is use particular kinds of editing as software to sort of smooth that out, but it doesn't necessarily. The action of smoothing it out has also created a particular kind of look that shifts it away from reality as well. So let me show. Okay, what I'll do here. Let me just click auto, see what happens. Okay, well, it's maybe a bit too bright for what I want to do just now. I'll take the highlights down a little bit, but that gives me a kind of starting point. So I'll open that. We'll just close that one of Viji's. And so this is kind of where we're starting. But what I wanted to do actually before we get to that is to talk just slightly about I want to talk a little bit about this sort of skin smoothing. Now this photo here was taken by Steve. Steve I was doing a workshop with a week or two ago. And so I took some photos of him. He took this photo of me. What we were doing was playing around with the lighting. Now, when we go into editing, background would be changed, little bits would be chopped and changed. But what I really want to talk about here is the notion of the skin. So if we come in 100% here, we can see we've got my skin here, and it's got, you know, all the usual kind of bits of your pores and stray eyebrow and all the facial markings that everybody has. Now, what you can do with this is you can smooth by blurring skin, but there are things like, if I duplicate that layer, if I go to filter neural filters in Photoshop, and there is an option here to skin smoothing. So if I do skin smoothing, you can immediately see that that's started to smooth up the skin, and I can take that up a little bit more, increase the smoothness, and we're going for, oh, that's a nice little kind of really soft, it knocks years off me. And I can click OK, and we've got this nice kind of, so when we take that off, ooh, suddenly we notice all these little marks that I had, and the lines and the wrinkles and the texture of the skin all stands out much more once we take it off. But when I put it back on, we've youthened me a bit. It gives me a nice little glow, except for the fact that it kind of looks quite unnatural. It looks unnatural to me anyway. It's so common, this kind of thing now, that we're almost kind of getting used to it. Phones have built-in skin smoothers. How many times do you see your friends on Facebook or people you know, and their face constantly looks so much smoother than when you see them in real life? All it means is you get used to seeing them like this. So when you see them in real life, the first thing you notice is all the bits that aren't right, or the landscape of the face becomes much more intensified. So I tend to think it kind of fires against you when you go putting on your smooth face onto social media. It just means that if you're making yourself look 10 years younger, when people meet you, the first thing they think is you look 10 years older. And that's not necessarily the first impression you want to give people. So the point is with this is that we've gone to really nice smooth skin. Now, if I come back to what Marie has done here, we can see that probably you can do the same thing. If I duplicate that and then filter, camera raw filter, no, not camera raw, neural filters, filter neural filters, and then again go to skin smoothing. Let's just bring this down a little bit and zoom in a little bit, and we can increase it, increase the smoothness and stuff like that, and then click OK. We've now got a much more softened face. Now, what might have done as well before we did this is maybe get rid of a couple of the little bits of dry skin as well, so that it has more effect. But when it's taken to sort of, where are we? This level. So let's just open this in Photoshop as well. And he's also, you can see he's done color shifts as well. He's shifted it away from the warm browns into the cooler blues. We can see that it's gone very smooth indeed, and likewise on the arm, very smooth indeed. There's no texture really left beyond a kind of basically what it is, it smooths it out and then adds a little bit of texture back in, but it doesn't quite feel as natural. So it's a kind of a tricky one here as to what we're going to do with it. I think, you know, that's maybe you go for somewhere in between. What you can do, again, with Photoshop, though, is you can kind of, using the AI generate. If we take something like the arm, if I lasso around here, something like that, and generative fill, put smooth skin and hit generate, let's just sort of see what happens. This will then go through, it will take a look at what's there, and it will, using the artificial intelligence, it will create a smoother skin. And maybe what we can do then is select two or three, give us usually 2 or 3 different versions, which takes a little bit of time as well. But here we go. Oh, it's given us little bits of hair on the arm as well. That one's less so. That one's, yeah, that's more like it's kind of child smoother skin. That one's got a texture. It looks natural. But what I want to do is kind of show you that you've got options there, and that maybe even if you choose something like this, what you can do then is you can change your opacity. You can go from that and you can nudge it up until it looks natural or stops looking unnatural. Slide it back and forth, and if you want, you can kind of work your way around the face and any parts of the skin that you want to do. You could also do the same thing with the t-shirt as well if you're wanting to get rid of bits of hair or dust and things like that. So there's that side of things. So that's one part of the thing that I want to talk about, because the problem is I think that to come back to sort of just get rid of that one. To come back to this picture is I think that this has made it so smooth it stopped looking as natural, and so takes us away from the notion of cinematic, and it was specifically cinematic you wanted to talk about. Now, if you're going to go cinematic, the other thing about cinematic is, I think, is light, and that's one of the other things I was going to talk about here. Now, what you've done here, Murray, is you've got the light coming in from the left, and it looks like what you have is a large probably a large softbox, single light. You might have a reflector over on the left, over on the right, bouncing a little bit of light. I'm not totally sure, but primarily it looks like a one light setup, a kind of, and if I look into the eyes here, I can see just a little bit of highlight catching what will probably be your softbox over here. Now, when you have a single light source, that very often gives it a slightly more painterly feel as well. If you're going cinematic, sometimes you want to have a second light source. You want to have some kind of backlight or side light. You very often find that that's... So what I want to do here is I'll show you, there's a photo I did, some of you may remember back during lockdown. Closest thing I've got to yours, table, glass of whiskey, hat. Different kind of feel, obviously. Self-portrait here. Now, the light setup here is I've got light coming in from the right, but then I've also got a light above and behind, and that light behind is catching the highlights of the hat and the shoulders. And what that's doing is it's separating me out from the background much more. What's happening here with yours, both the edited and unedited version, is there's a plain black background, and that plain black background isn't necessarily really giving us much. Now, in my one, what I did, I was using a plain background, and what I actually did was I overlaid a brick texture to it. Now, what we could do with something like this is, now, is it possible to select the background? Kind of. Just kind of select, get the hat back in, and get that arm there. So I'm just going to do a very rough background here to show you that you could do something a little bit different. Okay, now, so let's just have to get in that bit there. So now we've got a background, there's different kinds of things we could do that. If we wanted, now again, generative fill, we could create a background. We could, if I put, let's say a sleazy bar, what would that, is that how you spell sleazy, E-A or A-E? Just want to kind of see what options it gives us. Oh, it's not giving us any options. Doesn't want to give us, okay, let's say an ordinary bar, pub bar. entirely sure. It must be. Sometimes with this, there's a certain kind of the words you choose. Sometimes it decides might be inappropriate, and it doesn't necessarily want to generate what you might be doing. Trying to get rid of adult themes or anything like that. So here we can see then, so that kind of creates this. I'm not sure what that is. That looks more like a kind of brass distillery thing. This one, got a hand of a barman behind as well, which is slightly interesting. But let's just say we went for that. So immediately then that creates a sort of slightly more interesting background. Now, whether you're wanting to create a background which you slot in, or whether you create something, or you do a slightly different setup. What I'm trying to say here is not that you necessarily have to go into a pub to do this, but that if you're kind of going for that slightly cinematic, then that black backdrop is maybe not necessarily playing to your strengths. Now, we could also, with this curves, just hook it onto that background there, darken it down a little bit so that it's not, now, edges here are overlapping a little bit, so that's not perfect, but just trying to give you a slight idea of what you could do with that. Or we could even make that even more out of focus. So we go to filter, blur, Gaussian blur, not too far or something like that. But you can play around, so you could darken, you could blur, but you could have a different picture in. What I'm saying is that essentially having a different kind of background is another way of doing it rather than straightforward black. But like I say, you could just easily we could also, instead of having pub bar, let's sort of go back here, remove that. Supposing we put brick wall, sort of see what that looks like. Now, it's not necessarily that I'm saying that you should be using the AI to fill it in, but that ideally maybe you find your own photos and find something interesting to put in there. I'm just doing this for the convenience of while we're doing the podcast. Okay, it's slowly building up. I'll have a sip of water while we're waiting. Okay, brick wall, we've got that one. Got this one. Got this one, but I quite like that. That's got quite a nice texture to it. So again, you can see that is kind of adding something else to it. Now, if we take this idea, but we also added in like that extra bit of light, a little bit of light bouncing off the wall here, and then just catching the edge, or that if that wall was further back and there was a light off to one side, and we were just getting a little bit of highlight that was catching the edge of his cap, catching the edge of his shoulder, separating him from the background. Then I think that's at that point you start to look a little bit more cinematic. Curves for that, that's too where are we? That's too strong. I do like it kind of maybe darken down a bit, just darken down a touch more, something like that. But the question is now, so we've got that, we've created a background, ideally, like I say, you would put in a light, you've then gone for a crop of some kind, so you were doing, I think, something like that to give it a much more cinematic kind of crop. And then I think we also had let's extended out the little green cloth. Okay, actually I can see that's disappearing there, doesn't matter. Mumbling to myself, right, okay, so the other bit then is what you were talking about was colour grading. And here I'm going to veer off onto a little bit about the idea of playing around with colour grading. So what I thought I will do here, actually, I'll tell you what I will do first of all is I will just flip back for 1 sec, because just in case there's any comments. Yeah, okay, what have we got here? April says, Murray, love the creativity, and I know that guy. All right, okay. Pat's still chatting away with Meg. April saying, I wish I could do that to my skin in real life. Right, okay, so April says, yes, it has a painting look to it and a little rascal feel to it. How about you put it in black and white? You could put it in black and white, although actually I think part of the thing is the green felt is part of it, and you want the whiskey. I think the colour works quite well. Okay, let's flip back to the picture. And what I want to talk now about, actually, I'll tell you what we'll do. I'll use a different picture rather than playing with yours specifically. I'll take, right now, when I showed you this one I'd already been playing around with the colours. So I desaturated. So the unedited, I'd edited it up to this point, and then I played with the desaturating to kind of, but let's take, what I want to do is let's take this, I'll play around with this photo here to show you that what we're going to really talk about now is a little bit on colour grading. And what colour grading is the idea that you take an image and we now adjust the colours to give it a different feel. And very often it's talked in terms of film. And part of that comes back to when things were done on analog, on actual film, whether it was the paper it was printed on, the film negatives, the quality of the actual stuff itself, is when you're talking about colour, not everything interprets colour exactly the same way. What you're doing is you're causing, the light is hitting the surface, and then there are changes to that surface which make it go blue, red or green, or yellow, magenta, cyan and black. And that the quality of these will shift slightly depending on the manufacture of the film or the paper. And so back in analog days, a lot of what the photographers learned was that different kinds of paper you printed on or different kinds of film you shot with could have a profound effect on the colour and the feel. So that kind of led to a sense of colour grading. So if you want to then make changes, and you know, in the digital world, we can go in and we can play with the colours. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you 3 relatively simple ways, certainly if you have Photoshop, to do simple colour grading. Now you can go in and make all these little more subtle adjustments yourself and go in around and play with it. But for kind of quick convenience sake, there's 3 ways of doing colour grading. Now your very first option here is in your different little quick adjustment layer options. If you click here, you go down to Color Lookup, and Color Lookup has a whole bunch of preloaded options here. So we can see here we have things like tension green. Now if I click on that, you can see what it's done is it's given it a much kind of green and darker, almost matrix feel, which doesn't really suit this picture. From here I can go to a teal orange blue, soft warming, oh that one hasn't worked at all, a night blue, moonlight, late sunset, Kodak. So this is a Kodak particular kind of thing, which has kind of muted some of the colours, made them blue. This one's made the contrast more. We've got horror blue, futuristic bleak, a couple of other Fuji film, foggy night, film stock, fall colours, edgy amber, drop blues, crisp winter, it hasn't what we wanted, crisp warm look, and candlelight. So there's a few different options here where you can kind of find, you know, you're creating a different look with it. So quite simply, this color lookup gives you options. Now what you can do as well, if you want, is you can maybe mix them up. So it might turn out that maybe, where was that one? I think one I quite like here. So this one here, Kodak, here it gives this, it's a sort of slightly faded, but then what I might want to do is I'm going to duplicate the layer, but I'm going to find a different one. Let's go for drop blues. Or no, let's go for horror blue or something like that, which is a bit too strong, but then maybe I just take that down. And what I'm doing then is I'm blending the 2 of these together. And then what I might want to do is group them together. So we've gone from that to that. But then I can change the way this interacts with. So I've got this on normal, or I could take it through to soft light. Where have we lost it? Okay, I've lost something here. Okay, let's just, okay, let's do this. Change that to, okay, I'm not getting the effect that I wanted. What have I done? I've done something here. Let's go back to here, and yeah, I can change the way it interacts with any of these by whether I decide to darken, multiply, light, screen, soft light, overlay. That one I could go to linear burn or lighten screen, things like that. So you can see that I can then change the way each of these interacts with any of the others. So that's quick color grading number one, is to use the color lookup, find one that you like, find two that you like, mix and match, change your opacities and play around that way. Okay. Quick color grading number two is to go to Camera Raw, and what you will find here is that they have many more. Over here in the right hand, oh, can you see? Actually, I think you're just behind me. If I go over to here, there's an option here which says presets. And if I click on these presets, we've got a whole load of presets. Adaptive portrait, skies, subject, seasons, and each of these has got 10. Now, if let's say I go to style cinematic, cinematic 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Cinematic 2, we've got a whole bunch more. Futuristic. So what you can do here, just like the other one, if we go, we've got vintage as well. So there's a lot of these, which some of the differences are very subtle. And really what you do is you just go through them until you go, I don't like that, don't like that. And maybe you come across something, you go, oh, quite like that one. And then, so take something like that, you go, okay, well then now I've got that one, I can click OK on that. And maybe I want to change the way that I interact with it, or I want to change the opacity of it, or any of these kind of things. So color grading number two is to go into Camera Raw and make the changes. Color grading number three, quick way of doing it, is to use the gradient map. Now, normally the gradient map, if I click on this, is moving between the little color palettes you've got, so the black and the white in this case, but we have a whole bunch of different options. If I went red and green, really awful. So there's a bunch of presets here, but there's also a whole bunch of other presets that you can get hold of. And if we do something like, we've got blues, and we come down to here, say we've got something like this one, which I quite like, is a kind of a sepia to blue. There's another, let's go to sepia to blue. Now, rather than going just from black to white, it's going from black through blue, through sepia to white. Now we've got that, again, what we can do is we can change the interaction with it. So maybe if we give it a soft light, then that's created this effect. Now, this is maybe too dark, so we can change the opacity of it and just nudge it this way a little bit. Or what we could do is put a layer in between. So if I put a kind of, say I get a curves layer and just, not that, let's move that one out of the way. Just lighten this up a little bit. And then when I go back to the gradient map, I can make that a little bit darker. And you can see then that we can interact the different gradient maps here. So, and then if you want, you can go in and you can create your own gradient maps. So basically your way of color grading, of shifting these colors, is you can use the color lookup table, you can go to Camera Raw and use the presets, or you can play around with gradient maps. And with each of these, you can then overlay them on the image. You can overlay more than one. You can change the opacity from 0 to 100%. And you can change the way they interact, whether it's soft light or overlay or screen or dark burn or any of these kind of things. So in essence, by playing around with each of these kind of options, that gives you more ways to play with a particular kind of cinematic look. So if there is a particular cinematic look you are looking for, if there's a director you particularly like, or there's a film you particularly like, or there's a scene from a film that you particularly like, go and study what it looks like. Try and get a sense of what the colors are doing, and then see if you can find a color match that is going to be sympathetic to the picture that you've created. So, a lot of information in that. So ultimately then, what we're talking about is, if you're out of the photo that you created there, The first problem with making it cinematic is that the editing style you've done is already more kind of painterly illustrative. And that creates a particular style which suits that style, but then it's difficult to turn into cinematic afterwards. So you have to kind of go back to the original, edit it in a slightly different way. The second bit with that is the cinematic. If you really want to go cinematic, I think the plain black background is working against you. Maybe a slightly more textured background, but certainly the idea of a side light or a backlight or something which is creating a nice little bit of edge along the shoulder and the catching the cap and separating the boy, your grandson, out from the background. And then the third bit of this is the colour grading. And there you go, 3 different ways of colour grading, which are to use the colour lookup table, to use the presets in RAW, or to play around with the gradient maps, either using preset ones or making your own. Lots there. Hope that's been useful. Thank you very much for sending that image in, though. Right. Okay, so that pretty much brings us to the end of this podcast. Now, next couple of weeks, it's going to be a bit tricky. It's highly unlikely I'm going to be doing next week. There's a chance for Maggie and me to get away for the weekend. So we're planning on doing that unless something else leaps in. If something else leaps in, then, well, I won't be here for the weekend either. There's also potentially something that might be coming up in 2 weeks' time, but I don't know is a simple answer. I think at the moment, really just watch the social media. Go to the Facebook page, Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. Go to my ordinary Facebook page, Kim Ayres Photography. I will put up an event page on Facebook. But keep your eye out on the social media. Also, once I've got something set up, particularly, just come to YouTube. Come here to YouTube/Kim Ayres and set the notifications so you get alarm when it's going to turn up. And I'll have something in about when the date is going to be up. So, yeah, everything's a little bit up in the air, but hopefully there will be something either in 2 weeks' time or in 3 weeks' time. And then we're on the run up to Christmas. Meanwhile, if you want to send in images for feedback, then I can certainly take a look at them and get around to them. I will also say I had a couple of questions coming in before as well. I'll let you know that I haven't forgotten about them. April was asking me about coloured backgrounds. So that's an interesting topic, so I may well look at that. And then Marilyn was asking me about the notion of back button focusing. So anybody who's got a slightly more complicated DSLR or mirrorless camera, somebody who's not using their phone, there's other ways of focusing rather than just pressing the shutter or semi-depressing the shutter. You can sometimes adjust the focus to come out of a button on the back. Is there any advantage to that? Well, I'll explore a bit of that and talk about that. So that will either happen in a couple of weeks' time, or in a couple of weeks' time I'll tell you when I'm going to be doing that. Oh, right, okay. So, apologies about everything being slightly loose there, but thank you ever so much to everybody who's been chatting away, giving me feedback, saying hello and all the rest of it. And thank you to Murray, to Nicola, Viji and Jack for sending in the images. Hope you found this interesting. I look forward to seeing you all next time. Take care. Bye-bye. Now, I'm saying that, take care, bye-bye. I need to find this one. Cheerio.